Let's look at construction. Because the guy that drew it up, I can't deal with him.
Really.
So let's have Craig Covey do it. So Craig Covey looks at it. He goes, I'd like to change the way we do all the footings. And really gotta do that. So it's just, these engineers are supposed to be so. And I told you, our 18 square foot building is a 6-inch wide.
We have a 6-inch wide only come in with 4 townhomes.
Yeah, working on.
Well, that's 4 townhomes.
6-inch wide. It's fucking crazy.
I'm talking about an 1,800 square foot rectangle. Anyway, I mean, we got all our electrical done yesterday, except the HVAC because he hadn't gotten all the changes.
What are you doing for HVAC? Just unit heaters or?
No, another mechanical engineer story. He wants to. So I wish I could redo some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's just torture.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Well,
The advantage of the heat pump is that if I ever want to cool it a little bit.
yeah, it'll be more.
When are you starting to dig up your garage?
My
I always
garage.
forget to do it.
You said you're
Oh,
digging up your garage.
today. Yeah, there should be socketing right now.
And did the construction documents not show a depth?
Oh,
It did, but it was in a note. It wasn't explicitly shown.
You guys ready to get started?
Probably, but also. the owner Should know.
It is at each fair.
Garage. and-
We're ready.
Just.
Yep.
Yeah, you can use the mallet, right? Kind of fun. All right, we're gonna call like to start this meeting. It's 9:02 on October 1st, 2024. Do we need to move to open?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. I don't remember.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Okay.
Roll call.
We'll go ahead and do that and do a roll call.
Katie Souls,
Nick Crab.
Abby Samuelson,
Lori Hannon.
Mark Thompson. Bill Palmer.
Greg Beckler.
Very young.
Steve Fitzgerald, and I'll be leaving, folks, when my wife gets out of a procedure down here in Denver, so apologies for that.
that's okay, you have an excuse. Hope she does well.
Yep, all good.
All right. Let's start to the approval of the agenda. You wanna make a motion?
I can make a motion. A move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, let's approve the consent agenda.
On the, I have one comment on the minutes, it's not a big deal, but, Barry was the one to make motions on the first, on 2 and 3. The chair, called for a motion, so it's been changed in our one that's filed, but just let you all know. Not a big deal.
Thank you.
Other than that, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Let's move to open forum. If there's anything for the open forum at the moment. Okay. All right, and then we'll move to the revised draft for the Board of Trustees Planning Commission recap documents.
I just wanted to, I'm going to share my screen, share, our final, hopefully version, at least the version that's intended to go to the board for the public hearing on October 16th. And we are working on getting that notice of the public hearing published. So that should go out a week from Wednesday in the newspaper for the statute. This is largely what we looked at. We made those few edits that were in the revision, that were in the resolution, at the last meeting. And then the other changes that were made, really were just switching out a couple of the photos. We switched out the one at the top here. Sarah went and had her just kind of add in some photos. I felt like she had a few better ones than what yours had. We switched that one at the top. And then
That nice flower shot where the double was.
yeah, sorry, scrolling down,
Yeah,
scrolling
yeah.
down. Oops, like echoing.
Yeah.
So the distillery with both lovely photos, I realized was in there twice, and I felt like we should have some representation of different businesses. So we switched out the second distillery photo with this one. This is Nicole's little what does she call her food truck? Sweet Maggie's or something. Yeah. And then there was still that blank page. They took out the duplicate photo, but for spacer reasons, wanted to keep that page in there. So I just had Sarah add an additional photo, so we didn't have a blank page. But otherwise, this is pretty much, we made those couple corrections. What you guys saw, the planning commission thought it was really well done. They didn't really have too many comments. They had more questions and just kind of inquiries about how things work. Some of the things that we talked about with the planning commission was just kind of the role of the DDA and how you intersect with the planning commission. I know the town of Avon, their DDA, it's very much kind of overseen by the Avon town manager. And is very kind of integrated with the town. They had a plan of development before the DDA was formed, that they took to the ballot. They did it largely for a particular kind of affordable housing project, or to be able to do affordable housing and fund it within the downtown. But they do regular joint meetings between the Planning Commission and the DDA. And I think as we're talking about conceptual stuff for downtown and just designs, I know a lot of members of the planning commission have wanted to see design standards, so that's something that we could look at. But it might make sense to schedule some joint meetings with the planning commission if that's something that the DDA board is interested in. So it was one conversation we had, and then related to that was just the role of the DDA with new development. One of the questions that came up from the public, we had 2 members of the public that participated, and were also actually very complimentary. It was Parnell Quinn and Clark Lipscomb. But they thought it was a good document and long overdue, but Parnell had a number of different questions. One of them was making sure developers didn't want this to be something else that was going to slow their projects down. And that's definitely not the intent. I think the intent, if anything, is that the DDA might help streamline projects that are in line with the vision for downtown. But where the DDA kind of comes in, and the recommendation actually came that as early as possible. Somebody suggested at the sketch plan level. One of the developers, Clark, actually was like, by the time we submit a sketch plan, we've invested a lot of money. We pretty much know what we want to do and don't want to have to change that plan. I thought those weren't his words, but so really trying to involve the DDA for input at the earliest stages when a developer might first come into the town to have some initial conversations. So as we work through the work plan, we can talk about what that might look like. But otherwise, the planning commission was pretty complimentary. Katie, did you want to add anything, or Lori attended as well?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Was there any substantial change or in the resolution from what was presented?
No.
Nope. Yeah, they didn't recommend any changes. So,
Cool.
yeah. And they were all right. Well, then this will be the draft that it will be submitted to the Board of Trustees in their packet for the October 16th meeting. And there will be a public hearing. So again, we definitely don't need the entire board there, but you are all welcome. But if we did have a couple people, I think it is nice to have representation, and that way if questions come up.
I am curious about the fog effect on the photos. Is this intentional?
You know, Sarah and I,
Because it's, there's kind of a
It looks-
contrast between good photos and these photos. It's like, so.
Sarah and I looked at them because some of them were Ayers photos, but like this one is hers. Where did it go? The first big one was a photo that Sarah gave them, and hers is much clearer. So I think it is some sort of filter. If you guys would like, we can ask them to see if they can make them clear. Because you're right. I noted that some of these have this more faded
Yeah,
look.
A lot of them, it's like
And
this
then
fog effect.
some of
or
these,
smoke effect.
Like that one does not.
Looks like it's just the header photos, like the numbers.
The big ones, right?
Yeah.
Are kind of
Yeah.
faded
Even
out.
Like the ones that are like, they're numbered. That's the
But I noticed, I mean, that looks like a
No,
place
that's
that's
all
really
perfect.
foggy, which
Yeah.
is not
Yeah,
super
yeah.
representative.
Right,
of
if that
Fraser.
can be fixed, that.
Scotland.
And I know Tiffany, anybody else?
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, like a real.
I mean, I'm used to the overlay like color. Like when you try to make a brand story, you like do an overlay color
Mhm.
tone to every
Yeah.
photo, but that's not achieving that.
Okay,
It's just like fog.
Yeah, foggers.
yeah, I'll ask yours. to
not
take
in
a look at
Alaska.
that.
Representing almost fire.
This is like engraved.
We have never
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
But I love the picture.
Good.
I think it's
Okay.
good variety. I like that Amtrak one a lot.
Nice.
Makes
All right.
this look like we're,
Burning down.
yeah, like we're having.
Okay, so I'll ask them to change the like filter, whatever it is on the photos. Anything else?
I think it's great. They did an excellent job.
I agree.
Great.
And
Okay.
I love the creativity.
In the work plan, are we gonna talk to the building department and like make sure we have a clear understanding of like all that stuff?
That's coming up.
That'll be the next discussion.
Yeah, let's talk about the work plan. Yes, or at least we can talk with our planner or the building department. We can figure that out with the work
Okay.
plan. Yeah, what makes sense. Okay. Any other questions? All right, next up.
Do we need to vote to approve that? Is that possible? The revised draft?
But we haven't.
Oh, I don't think so because we approved it with the previous resolution that adds for these changes. I just wanted to show it to you and give you an update from the planning commission. So we do have Troy Bernberg online with us. Troy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hello,
Good morning, Troy.
Morning.
how is everyone? I hope you all are well. It's nice to be with you. Sarah, do I have the ability to share my screen?
Have we made you a co-host?
I found this on.
Oh, I have to stop sharing. I have to stop sharing.
Gary's gonna help.
That's funny.
So
right.
before I dive into the Excel workbook, I think it's noteworthy to share some good news in regards to the legislative session quickly. You know, having Initiative 50 and 108 off the ballot, I think, is a good thing for all local government in Colorado. And it was a result of the governor placing a special session in August. And we now have new legislation that will take place in 25 going forward. Your assessment rates will be coming down. Assessment rates for residences specifically will now have 2 assessment rates. That's never happened before. So you will have a assessment rate for school districts, for school district tax calculation, and you will have an assessment rate for all other local government assessment and tax calculation. So it's a little different. We'll have to be patient with the assessors as they update their software to allow for that capability. There is a property tax revenue cap, but I think the good news for this DDA and all my other DDA clients and all the other DDAs in Colorado, new construction is excluded from that cap. So that's where you're going to get a lot of your increment. And so it's good that the legislation excluded that from the revenue cap. So all good news there. And to kind of introduce what I'm about to show you. It is a graphical illustration of the DDA's base and its increment. And I will say that when I'm talking about increment and DDA business, I'm always going to be talking most of the time in assessed value or taxable value, not market value. Okay. So because with all the noise with assessment rates, I think it's easier just to illustrate in assessed values. Okay. So your total assessed value is composed of two components, your base valuation and your incremental valuation. And I think it's excellent news that in your very first year, you got $557,000 of increased incremental valuation. So that's what you collect your revenue on. And that's a significant number for a first year DDA. It just is. And I'll show you that here in a moment. Okay, let's share my screen. Okay, so I know this is a little busy, but okay, so here is your base valuation. 16,655,790. Okay. So in the first year, your total assessed valuation and your base assessed valuation are the same. In your first year, you had a increase in your total valuation, and that was split up to a small increase in your base valuation. And here is the $577,000 of incremental AV that I just mentioned. The overlapping mill levy that we apply to the 577 to get your $65,000 of revenue. That's projected. This is using August 25th numbers. Okay, so those are preliminary. They become final on December 10th. So it's important to
Froze for
know.
a second there, Troy.
Oh, sorry
You're
about
back.
that.
You're back. If you just want to repeat whatever you had just said.
I said that these are preliminary numbers as of August. They will become final in December. So these numbers could change a little bit. Okay.
Troy, could you
Okay.
explain the difference between the assessed value and the base valuation?
Well, here, yes. So here in your first year, in the base year, your total AV and your base AV will be the same. Okay. In the second year, you have a total assessed valuation of 17,140,760. Okay. Of that, 16,563,720 is the base.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. And so this number that I've currently got highlighted, the 16,563,720, that is what all other taxing jurisdictions tax on, and that's what they collect. Okay. You see this number right here in yellow? That is the number that you apply your mill levy to. No, that's not a very good color. So you apply the overlapping mill levy to the incremental assessed valuation. This 577 is new construction. Okay. And it's principally from, you may not be able to see this, but bear with me real quickly. It is principally from 406 Xerox Street. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Okay.
Yep.
So you got the majority of that new construction number from that address. And I believe those are new townhomes or condos.
And commercial.
Apartments.
And yeah, and some commercial on the bottom. So, and that figure was 490 approximately of the 557. Okay. So that will give you that's important to point out because that will give you, all right, you see that kind of construction, you see that building and its building type, that's getting you the majority of this 65,000 here. Right here. So that 65,000 is mostly from that 406 address. So that gives you a little order of magnitude, okay, about where your increment's coming from, okay? So that was hold on, the market value, and I know I only talk in assessed value, but just for order of magnitude, that was a mixed use property and it's currently appraised at a market value of $7.1 million. Okay. And you get approximately 490 of that. Okay. And that gets you your 65. So let's move on. Here's a little county fee. Okay. So the county charges every taxing jurisdiction a small fee to collect taxes. That's what that 979 highlighted right here is. And then you have a net of just under $65,000. Okay. Now, here is the kind of illustrative chart that I was referencing. Okay. And then I have a box right here of, all right. So if nothing else changes, you'll collect $2.8 million over the next 30 years. You put that in today's dollars, that's just under 1.2 million. Okay. And then what I did, I think is also helpful, is I broke out the average annual revenue for every 10-year part of your initial 30-year cycle. So you're averaging 74,000 years 1 through 10, 96 in the second decade, and 124 in the third decade. Okay. Now, let me show you, okay, what happens. Now, I've got this new construction line here that's kind of highlighted in a gray. And this will illustrate how new construction impacts your increment in this chart. So the blue is your base. So it makes sense in your early year that you're mostly base. Approximately 93% of your total assessed valuation is base, and roughly 7% is increment. You want that green part of the bar chart to increase, okay? And so what I used was let's see here. Where did I put that? So I used a 4-townhome project that's coming online, roughly 2,200 square feet per unit. Okay. And I'm applying $350 per square foot for construction. I think that's maybe a little low, but I like to be conservative. Okay. And so that will get you a rough market value of $3 million. Okay. That equals an assessed value of about $200,000. So if I take that $200,000 and I put it here, okay, you noticed a small change in your incremental valuation. I'll go back and forth. See? So a $3 million project gets you roughly $200,000 of assessed valuation. That's a residential project, okay? And that will automatically feed into additional revenues and it gives you a little bump, okay? So this is just purely illustrative. The more new construction AV you can get, the more increment value that you will be able to collect on. Okay, so if you change this to 500,000 or even 1 million, you can see how that chart moves, how that orange part of the chart moves. Okay, so this is going to be the base kind of worksheet that I'll use. So as new construction comes in, I heard talking about when do you talk about planning commission? When do you talk about the DDA's input on a project? Certainly a sketch plan is one timeline. If you don't think things can change too much from the sketch plan, then you might want to do it earlier. And what I'll do is I'll go through the exercise of taking the development yield, which is the number of units, square foot, and then construction costs per square foot. And I'll take those numbers and I'll do a projection of what that project would generate in tax increment revenue. And then with that information as a board, you will make a decision about, all right, well, does the developer need a reimbursement potentially? Maybe they don't. Then you get to collect that and use it for operational sustainability. If it's a project that might have a gap funding need and you want to evaluate whether or not you should contribute an investment to it, then that's where my numbers come in. And so let's say a project generates $2 million of incremental revenue over 25, 30 years. You now have that number to say, all right, we'll give a portion back to the developer based on their performance of the project. And it's with that reimbursement power that you have that you can negotiate certain aspects of the development that the DDA desires and in your fulfillment of the plan of development. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or illustrate any other scenarios that you guys might have on mind. But I think the good news is I've not experienced, so you are my third new DDA. So out of my 6 clients, 4 of my DDAs are some of the newest in the state. I've not seen anyone benefit from increment in a first year like you all are getting to benefit. So I think that's something you should all be really thankful for, because this 577 right here, you get to keep collecting on that. So you've basically locked in roughly $64,000 of revenue so far. Okay. I have one DDA client that's not even at $65,000 yet of revenue, and they're 3 or 4 years older than you. As some perspective and context, so it's a really good starting place. We certainly want that revenue number to grow, but again, I've not seen this really helpful jump to getting a DDA going. And so should all be thankful for the 65. The 65 certainly won't go very far, but it's a great starting place.
Hey, Troy,
Yes, sir.
I'm curious, how feasible is it to do projections? Maybe sit down with planning commission, look at what we know it's coming, and build out at least a thesis of what we might see actually happen.
Yeah, so it's a great question, Steve. For me, as the discussion kind of started off with your meeting, we want some certainty that the development is in the pipeline, so to speak, right? So that's one area I can't really control. In some towns, like in another community I'm working in, they set a sketch plan. That doesn't necessarily mean the deal is going to go forward at all. So I could go through the exercise and show what that project could push out in terms of increment. But then, does the project actually come to fruition? So with that caveat, I'm happy to sit down with planning. I think those things, or at least staff, and start outlining each project that's currently in that pipeline. That 4 townhome unit project that I referenced, Steve, is something that's in the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
And so now that's where I can sit down with staff and they can say, well, Troy, 350 per square foot, super low. You need to up that. Then cool. You guys will know what those numbers are in your community, maybe a little better than I. I use research from online and CoStar to inform me. And then I do generally put a haircut on my numbers to be more conservative. Okay. And so for me, there's certainly projects that I talked about with staff in the previous months, just don't know where in the process those projects might be. But I'm happy to go through that exercise, Steve, and show you exactly, or a more accurate picture of what's in the pipeline and what will that generate. But I certainly think a project like 406 Xerox, that will give you guys an all good indicator. That project pretty much accounts for your $65,000, at least most of it. So you can kind of look at that project and say, hey, that's $65,000 of revenue for us. Now, again, that's just order of magnitude. My numbers would be a little more, I guess, in detail and more nuanced.
So Troy, we happen to have the developer of 406 Xerox as well as the townhomes in the room. Greg Beckler is one of our board members.
Okay.
So I have a couple questions for Greg. The 406 Xerox, that doesn't include the whole development, right? That's one of the buildings.
No, that's both buildings.
That is both
It's
buildings,
just
okay.
the lion's share of that's coming from the commercial
Right.
assessment on 406, 315 Fraser Ave's all
Right.
residential, so it's just a smaller impact on the assessed value.
Okay.
Or on the maybe.
But the 315 Fraser Ave, that would be in addition to this 490 that we got?
No,
Or
that's part of it.
That is part of it.
No,
Okay.
it is part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with the 4-unit townhomes, that also includes a small commercial space.
Correct.
What's
So-
the square footage on the commercial space?
So it's 800 square feet of commercial space, and then around 10,000 square feet of residential space on that townhome project. And then we have a sketch plan in for another project on that same street for 1,500 feet of commercial and about 10,000 feet of residential. And then phase 2 of that project's not sketch plan, but we have probably a project that's like twice the size of 406 Xerox.
Okay.
So I think realistically, I mean, I'm hoping I'm doing all those projects and plan to. So it'd be about the 200 you called for in 2025, 200K to maybe 250K in new construction assessed value. 2026, I imagine, would be 400 in new assessed value, and then 2028, maybe another 700,000 or 800,000 in assessed value, because that'll be bigger than 406 Xerox. Substantially.
Have you submitted those yet?
Submitted, yeah. Not on the third one, but so we have one under construction, one submitted, and then phase 2 of the one that's submitted is not designed. Yeah. And so that was a point I was gonna kind of bring up, because like we use the old strategic plan to guide our developments, now the new plan of development to guide our developments. I think like if Clark's building something here, he's going to use the new plan of development. But I think like for people coming from outside of Fraser, pointing them to that document, if that's really what we want, is going to
Yep.
be useful. And then finding a time, because like I've already submitted sketch plan, and I don't know if that was Clark or Parnell that said that, wanting to get slowed down. But I plan to present my sketch plan here and get input. But I was talking about it with Garrett and the planner here at Fraser. It is not something that's required of a developer to like get all the feedback, and like I want to get eyes on it, but I also don't want to resubmit and slow up the process. So what Garrett and I kind of talked about was getting plans in front of the DDA either at set sketch plan submittal or before, but then just kind of incorporating those items into your preliminary plat, so you're not working on a resubmittal and having to resubmit something that's really not required per town code. But try and get all eyes and ears on it sooner rather than later. So that's our plan, but yeah, it is kind of tricky to force people to do it or like mandate it. But I think it'll yield better product and, especially with the commercial mandate, there's a bunch of business owners in here. People are going to want to get your feedback before they build something if they're being smart about it, I would think.
And we'll circle back to this a bit with the work plan because this is going to come up. Because one of the things in the work plan and what Mike Scholes from AIRS really recommended as kind of like a first stop for the DDA was creating this kind of conceptual sketch plan for the Riverwalk district. And as part of the comp plan scope that the town is doing, that is part of it. And so my recommendation there would be to involve the DDA and what the comp plan is doing. And then if we need to get more granular with it, we can. But it's also this kind of collaborative effort and that the comp plan is happening now, but we have developers that are already submitting sketch plans and are within, their rights in the code to do so kind of thing. And so in terms of what that process looks like, since we're not doing the sketch plan 5 years before any development actually comes, it's kind of happening while development is also happening. And so exactly what that looks like, that process.
And AIRS also suggested to have like a very fine-tuned response and step-by-step process with any developer so that we're honoring and like what's the word, ethical, and how we treat every developer equally. And that, and historically, like 20 years from now, someone can't come back and be like, well, you did it differently, or why did you do it that way?
Well, and I think it's like bifurcated too. Like there's developments like my last one that will go in the DDA, but they're not going to be asking anything of the DDA. And so I think that
Right.
he was referring to is when they're coming and saying, hey, I want some money, what's the grading scale for that? And that does need to be consistent. But I like, it's tough because like I'm putting stuff in now. I'm not planning to ask for anything because I just want to get going.
Yeah.
But I do think we need to come up with a plan for once people start asking for things. And
I mean, I am curious if after all of this, you'll go back to look at your sketches and you're like, like I'm just curious if after
I
this
don't see a-
experience, if
yeah.
it's changing.
no, I mean, we've not really like we want to put commercial, like basically with that street in the Riverwalk, specifically on Clayton, like it's not the best place to go start a business right now with how it looks. So like we're kind of scaling up our commercial as we go through projects and phases. So I don't think I'd change that. And we're kind of putting it phasing in a way where like we're doing our first project is visible through Fraser Avenue from 40, and I own a building on 40 where I can sign it. So like that's kind of helps get that project going. And then the next one will be visible from there and we'll have improvements in it's visible from the trail. So like we're kind of the way we're phasing it, I don't think I'd change. And I'm just hopeful that we'll feel more confident doing more retail, more riverfront restaurant space as time goes on, because we know we have, the viability of kind of plowing money into retail in those spaces rather than building super, super dense residential.
Yeah.
So that's my hope. And if we have a funding vehicle to, if that's the will of the DDA and of the town, to have a, super stepped back restaurant on the river with lots of open green space, then we can say, all right, well, there's a way to make that happen now. So it'll change future stuff maybe, but for what we have phased out, we're kind of dipping our toes on that
Yeah.
street for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and Greg, we had talked to him about sharing his sketch plan today for the other development, but the town had just gotten it and Garrett was working through comments and wanted to make sure everyone's on the same page. So potentially on the 22nd when we meet, if you're available, Greg, we can do
Yeah,
it then.
and I'm happy if you want to email it out, like I said on that.
Okay.
time, you know, everyone can look at it. We're not gonna change anything. I'm meeting with Garrett. I think Garrett wanted to meet tomorrow
Yep.
before this group saw it. So I'm meeting with them tomorrow, but happy to have everyone on the board
Yeah.
see it and yeah.
And I'm gonna sit in on that meeting.
Mhm.
One thing I was gonna say, too, is that, I mean, one of the powers of the DDA is just that incentive, that carrot that, developers to a certain extent can do what they want within the code and the zoning, and there, can be some cajoling and arm twisting, but at the end of the day, there are certain things that Katie could speak to this better than I can, like the planning commission or the board of trustees, I don't want to say are required to approve, but we risk lawsuits if we don't approve, right? Because they are within their
Right.
development rights. But the DDA has that power to say, well, if you want any of this tax increment coming back to you, your development needs to fit within our vision, right? Or to kind of request certain things to have access to some of that funding.
Well, like you
It's
said,
like
if
Troy wants to jump in
someone
there.
needs something, right, they can come here.
Yeah.
But it would also be nice, yeah, if the planning commission is like, man, they might really, they could use some help with this, that might be great, then people are pointing in the same direction,
Yeah.
but yeah, it can come from all different angles, which
Yeah.
is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as everyone knows that it's out there
Yeah.
and we're open to discussion, right, that's the biggest piece, no matter how they
Right. Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah, thanks. This is an awesome conversation. I'm glad you guys are having it. To the kind of scaling and how do you, how do you figure out how much to give to who? I've developed policy documentation that guides boards through this process. I do make it purposefully flexible and not quite black and white. There's a scoring matrix, there's an application, and I think there's gonna, to the point that was made, you want some developers need your help. You do want that mix of developers that might need some help or might need some funding for enhancements to their project, but you also want projects that support themselves. And because ultimately that will give you revenue to help place make and enhance and beautify the DDA's boundaries, within the DDA's boundaries. And so for me, there are going to be some applicants that are going to check more boxes than the other. So that's why I like to give ranges based on how much the project meets the goals of the plan of development. So, and so I think that's important to keep in mind, that you want to be a little flexible. It can't look the same for each project because each project is going to be different. And so I think having these conversations now is really important to start understanding, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be considering these things. And ultimately, you need to check a few boxes before you even get to dollars and cents. Does the project meet the plan of development? And to what extent does it meet the plan of development? So I would say that you want to be flexible. There are going to be needs that every applicant is going to have to address. Certainly, their project needs to be able to generate enough increment that allows you to keep some and reimburse some. So, for example, I don't tell any of my clients to reimburse 100% of tax increment, particularly in an early part of your life cycle. So you want to keep some of that funding for programming and sustainability. And so you'll want to, as you guys consider projects, you'll get a feel for what that looks like and what a distribution looks like from one project to another.
Well, and I think that's a great segue into our work plan, which starts out talking about a financial investment policy. If you guys want to jump to that, unless there's any other questions, but again, this will kind of just continue this conversation.
Is the ski broker lot in the DDA boundary?
No, Clark came to one of our board meetings when we were bringing this forward before it was on the ballot, and he asked that all of his properties be removed.
Okay,
So none of his
that's
property.
there in the metro district.
That was one of the reasons, I think, is that all of his stuff is metro districts that already are. Yeah. So. I will go ahead and share my screen and we can kind of talk through this document. I know it's hard to see.
Yeah. Anybody else want a hard copy of this to look at?
This,
Yeah.
Digital.
I was wondering if there's a digital version that we
Yeah.
could like, well, I guess you don't really want to play with it, huh?
No, the PDF is in your packet, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, which I might not be, I emailed you the Excel version so that if you did want to play with
Oh,
it
you can.
yourself, yeah.
Okay.
Troy, are you able to share that assessed valuation spreadsheet?
Equation. Like you could, like,
Absolutely. Whether it's stupid or not, I scratch make these things so that there's no bugs from one client workbook to another. And I'm happy to share that portion of it and you guys can plug and play.
Thank you. All right. Are you guys okay going through this digitally? Does anyone want me to try to print copies real quick?
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
I can zoom.
I'll try to make it as big as possible, but still allow us to kind of see the overarching spreadsheet. So the first section, and again, I look at this as Eris created it. I made just a couple small changes. And then as I was going through it, I decided that it was better just to bring it to the group and we could edit it as a group as we go through it. So I see this as a starting draft of our work plan. Because again, I think Eris brings a lot of expertise, but at the end of the day, it's also what this board wants to do and prioritize. So the first area is finance and investment policy. Within that, he's got different DDA goals, establish a preliminary framework for the policy to include projected outcomes preferred by the DDA. So what do we really want to prioritize? Consider a facilitated meeting of the DDA board to discuss priorities and to help build the policy document. Adopt specific policies and procedures to guide decision-making and actions. Clear policy guidelines will empower staff to confidently implement programs. Consider incentives to attract development that meets the DDA vision. So first and foremost would be the TIF incentives. There are some others that we can look at in collaboration with the town and what the town would allow. The town of Fraser is statutory. I don't know how many of you are familiar with statutory versus home rule. If towns have adopted their own charter, and there's a whole process to go through this, and this is something that Fraser is looking at doing in the future, you get a little more leeway with a number of things, one of them being economic incentives that potentially could be offered to a developer. The town of Fraser is currently a statutory town, so we are bound by state statutes that dictate these things. So when we've looked at incentives that can be provided to development in the past from the town, we can do a sales tax rebate to a business owner. We're more limited in what we can offer like a commercial developer. The DDA, however, can offer that tax increment as an incentive, and we could look at different possibilities. But here's a lot of the things we were just talking about. Considering a formal application process, what specific information does the developer need to provide? What information is required for the DDA to make a decision? Some of these do cutoffs. We can work on formatting for that for the PDF versions. Developing a process to assess new requests and create a feedback loop for refinement. working with the town of Fraser to establish guidelines for the DDA's involvement in land use code updates and downtown development standards, establishing a process for final approvals for new projects and investments by the DDA, work with the town to consider streamlined development review for projects that support the downtown DDA vision. So any immediate thoughts or questions? Otherwise, I'd love to hear Troy's thoughts on this particular section.
I was it Mike with Ayers?
Mm-hmm.
He had mentioned there's like a lot of grants available too, like specifically for public. And just thinking of my project in specific, there was like grants available for public connectivity and like adding a public sidewalk within your private project. Is there a way for us to like give developers like, hey, here's where you go to first, here's all like the available grant money, go to that, then come to us for gap financing if there's something you're still trying to achieve? Is that like, is
Yeah,
all of that like in a place where we could share it easily?
I don't believe so currently. That's something we could work on. In my experience, most of the grants that I've looked at and written, a private developer wouldn't be eligible. But that's not to say there aren't other grants out there that a private developer would be eligible for. There are ones that the DDA could apply for.
So I think that might be what he was referring to. So like, for instance, on one of our projects, we want to put an ADA ramp from 40 through our project down to Clayton Court.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that you don't necessarily have to pay that with DDA TIF dollars. The DDA could get a grant for something like that.
Yeah.
And then provide that to the developer.
So for example, there's a grant that we just got for the bike park project that's through CDOT, and it's a revitalizing Main Street, I believe is the name of the grant. The DDA could apply for a grant through them. It's a maximum of $250,000. And when I asked her, because there was a project that the town looked at previously to do like a shared public space patio, as I understand it, between Camber and the winery. So Nick might be able to speak to this better than myself. So for something like that to be eligible, the DDA could apply for that money as the entity that would be eligible to apply. It would have to have a public easement, or like that patio would have to be deeded over. So you'd have to deed, the walkway to the DDA or the town, something like that.
Yeah.
And again, there could be other grant money out there, but most of the grants that I've seen, there are generally for like nonprofits or municipalities, DDA type entities. But yes, that is one of the items here. He has it at the end. We could move it up, but identify possible funding sources to supplement DDA's budget, and continually assessing the availability of state, federal, and nonprofit grants. And I would just kind of, as an action item, just kind of develop a grant writing strategy.
I was gonna ask, because who writes that?
Yeah. As your lone staff member. And the main grant writer for the town. I mean, I think it would probably, we would need a strategy. I maybe somewhat at capacity with some grants. I was up last night finishing up another one for the bike park, and we have more that we have to write for Victoria Village and childcare. So if DDA members wanted to help with some of those, that would allow us to go after more. But there's a couple ones, the one we wrote for the bike park last night, I think would actually work really well for the DDA as well. It talks about placemaking and, is really based on community assets and public spaces. So that would have to be part of that strategy, just kind of identifying which ones the DDA wanted to go after in terms of priorities and who was taking the lead and who could help contribute. And I find ads, if you're writing multiple grants for the same project, it gets a little easier because you can just kind of recycle that language, but.
We wouldn't like hire a grant writer out of that 65K. would that not be beneficial?
We could. I think it would depend on the grant, and what would make sense for the grant. If it's a smaller grant, it might not make sense. I think people definitely hire grant writers, and that's a common practice, especially if you're going after larger federal grants.
Cause Tiffany had sent me a few CDOT grants
Yep.
for, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and they've got a couple different ones. And honestly, that revitalizing Main Street was one of the easier ones. And I think it's one of the easier ones to get.
Okay.
And the reporting's easier because that's the other piece. Once you write the grant, is having the capacity to do the grant reporting.
And then does that work with like a developer? So if we were like, hey, Greg, like,
Yeah,
we got
like,
this grant, like, I don't know what the ethics are at that and process.
oh yeah, I don't know about me specifically, but like if there was a grant available or money available to put, a pedestrian cut through a project that, would, we're already planning to either save space there or it benefits the project, I would totally do that if it was something that, isn't gonna burden my project, right?
Right.
Right. And obviously stuff kind of pops up at a moment's notice sometime, but I think that would be part of our kind of as we drill down into our priority setting for the year of these are projects that we'd like to find a way to fund, or these are specific grants we can go after, these are when they're due, and kind of work that into that plan. All right, let's go back up to the investment policy then. And Troy, I know you got to jump off here pretty quick, if I recall. Did you have thoughts on how this is laid out in relation to this? Or would you want to maybe talk a little bit more through your usual process so the board can determine if it would make sense to
Sure.
have you do that piece for us or work with us to do that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. There's only one exception that I'm taking with this, upfront cash, in that third box under DDA goal, upfront cash is going to be spent for programming, grant matches, staffing, management administration, marketing, beautification, programming, all that good stuff. I really strongly counsel my clients never to give developers cash up front. Those should be performance-based reimbursement contracts. And that's how all DDAs do 90% of their business is through a reimbursement agreement. And so that's something that I think is very important to lay out. For me, grants are in my policy documentation. I insist that my clients, I know that certainly from a capacity standpoint, that has to be considered, but grants should always be looked after, always. To me, there's plentiful opportunities through CDOT, certainly the Department of Local Affairs, DOLA, Department of Housing, etc. So for me, there's just too many opportunities. And I think, for me in the policy, it's really being about being a fiduciary. We are all fiduciaries of taxpayer dollars, and I think to the extent you can leverage those dollars with grant opportunities, that's the right thing to do. And so for me, the town's done a pretty good job of exploring these opportunities, and I think that practice should certainly be continued through the DDA. And so what my policy documentation does is it's meant to be an educational tool, certainly for the board members. So as board members change throughout the years, this can be a manual of sorts to say, all right, what is TIF? What am I supposed to be doing with it? How am I supposed to be looking at it? And it really is a couple of things. It's a risk management tool, okay, because you're going to be getting these revenues and you're going to have to be deciding how to responsibly invest these dollars. And so there's the educational piece first, and then it goes into your tools, okay? And principally, you have 4 tools. You have PayGo, which is what I just talked about, operations, admin, programming. But the majority of your funds are going to go to projects. And so I go through in my policy documents, all right, well, what's needed from the developer, i.e. the applicant? What does the project have to meet in terms of standards? I want this document to be dynamic. I don't believe, and maybe I'm in the minority, that policy is law. I do not believe that. I believe that policy is our guardrails for good business. And so for me, it's a document that's meant to be looked at least once a year to make sure it's capturing everything. Because inevitably, new things pop up, and sometimes those should be memorialized. For example, the DDA should always be in a reimbursement project. It should always be collecting some portion of it back for operations and sustainability. And then what range? So let's say, using my example from before, let's say a project generates $2 million of incremental revenue. How do you decide how much the developer gets and why? So part of that's based on the eligibility requirements. And also, if the project just knocks it out of the park, the policy document allows you to consider a larger reimbursement for a project like that. Okay. Not all projects are going to check all the boxes. So you do want a range of percentages that you're willing to consider in terms of reimbursement. And it goes into some other details. When should you go into executive session? I think you've got a great star in Sarah, so she'll be able to tell you when you need to do that anyway, but it's memorialized in my documentation. And so for me, it's really about risk management and being that financial steward of your community. So that's really what my policy is about. It's meant to be read and referenced. So it's something that, I spent a lot of time on, and can customize it to whatever you all would want it to be.
So are we looking at two different guidelines here with getting us the same place between Troy's and Ayers, or a combination of the two?
No, so as part of AIR's work plan, what they're presenting is that we create these financial investment policies.
Okay, and Troy has them.
And so we could
To look
we could create them ourselves, or we could work with Troy to create them. I believe AIRS also would help do that if we wanted to.
Okay.
AIRS originally had under the budget impact 0. I think it would be worth having some outside consultant help with this.
I agree.
So if Troy's our guy, paying him for services to help create that, and we have that contract in place to do that if that's something that we want to do. But just having that kind of foundation of the guidelines and the criteria that I think everybody's been talking about, and that I think is in part maybe, Nick, what you were getting to with your question when we were approving the plan of development, about not seeing that specifically in the plan of who do we give money to and how are we fair, while still having flexibility to prioritize the projects that we think, like he says, really kind of hit it out of the ballpark in terms of that vision that we have for downtown and the public benefit being provided.
The matrix Troy had mentioned is, I think, important. And I think seeing that matrix would be interesting to then apply like the inventory of Fraser and the prioritizing of like what our vision is since we've built this plan, and then how do you implement it? To know, like, we don't want to say all these yeses and then be like, wait, hold on. Because there might be a
Right.
diamond, that comes to us.
Yeah. And AIRS suggested this as a first priority. They've kind of both categorized, grouped, I can't talk this morning, group things together as a first, second, or third priority. And what I've heard from everybody is that there's agreement that this should be kind of top of our list of things to tackle, so that once we start getting proposals or want to make proposals, we have this kind of outlined. Troy, what does your process usually look like? Like at this point, I recognize you have kind of templates, but you also and things you typically include, but you also kind of specialize it to the
Yes.
DDA. So
Yeah.
would you start and present a draft, or do you kind of go through questions in a meeting, or what is that process?
Yeah, if that's the direction given, then yes, draft, review, comment, tear up, uh, revise, finalize, adopt. So for me, um, you know, um, that's kind of what I've done in the past is I've presented a draft and for every board member to read through and comment thoroughly. Some of it seems repetitive, but it's purposeful and why it's repetitive in certain sections. For example, I repeat that, blank checks aren't really meant to be written. They be later in your life cycle when you're nice and up and running and have, reserves that you need for operational sustainability. But it's really your document, and I want to empower you guys to read it and make it yours. So for me, I will certainly customize it to everything I know about the Fraser DDA so far. And then it's ultimately, I think, where you're going to have most of your comments personally is probably around the scoring matrix and maybe application portion of it. Everything else you can certainly comment on, but I think that's where I've seen most of the kind of personalization occur is in that part. And so things like, eventually you want to have a reserve policy, right? You want to be able to have emergency cash. Those are things that are contemplated in the policy, but don't have to be implemented right away. Again, the document's meant to be really a guiding light, if you will, for things to consider as you grow as an organization.
Any questions?
Well, it seems like working towards policy at this time is the way to go. And it doesn't really affect at this point our long range visioning, because with the new master plan being worked on for the town, we want to I think we need to really coordinate our work with that and feedback from the community. So,
Yep.
good.
Yeah, and yours
you.
has listed our customer base kind of here being political leadership and funders, and our partners, the local developers. So I think there is value in getting feedback from those developers in terms of if what we're presenting would actually, incentivize the development we're looking for or not.
Okay. So how about,
right.
how do we pay for Troy?
Well, we will next week jump into hopefully creating, not next week, our next meeting, creating our budget. We do currently have the contract with Troy for these services, so it would just be giving him the go ahead to work on this if that's the direction we want to move.
Well, we should have cash next year, 2025.
Well,
Along
and
with
this
what we have for this year.
this could also potentially come out of that $30,000 seed money that we got from the board. If we wanted to do that this year versus waiting until next year or start that process.
And we've spent 15, right?
We've spent 15.
So
Yeah.
15,000.
We spent 15 and then we'll have money that we owe Butler, Snow, and Troy for time that they've spent on the work that they've done thus far. So once I get those invoices, I'll let you know where we're at. But yes, 15 is spoken for.
Hear that, Troy? Can't go over 15.
Yeah.
No, I'll certainly be under that. Again, for me, it is something that I have a template for. I will customize it, and so for me, yeah, it won't cost anywhere near 15 grand. So it just won't. It won't take me that long to put it in place, and so for me, I believe in being fair, particularly for organizations like yours that are just starting out. So, you have to be lean and mean, and so that means I have to be lean and mean.
One question on just funds and availability. Will we basically, so 406 pays their taxes next year for the calendar year 24. When that payment's made, the increment from that specific project and any other projects that had increment will then be sent from the taxing authority to the DDA.
As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Troy, the county
Yep.
assessor will receive that money and then they give it to the town that funnels it to the DDA?
Yes. So the statute permits either the DDA to collect or the town to collect on behalf of the DDA. Those funds will go into a special account with the town. And part of what my policy will kind of envision is you getting monthly tax receipt reports. Okay. For me, financial transparency, I take it exceptionally seriously. Okay. And we can't be transparent with your constituents unless we're getting that transparency. So you will be collecting property taxes principally between January and June. Okay. And you'll want monthly tax reports. So someone like me, or for you all to make sure that you're collecting what you expected to collect. Okay. And so for property tax, you'll have almost most of your money, if not all of it, by June, July. Might have some smaller payments trickle in after that, but bulk of your revenue is roughly around June.
And further down, they have it under board recruitment, but we can separate this out to kind of accounting. But one of the things I talk about is developing an accounting system. Largely the DDA at this point is kind of beholden to the town accounting
Yeah.
system. Nick could keep separate records as a duplicate if the DDA wants that. But I think we can incorporate into here kind of that tracking of the monthly tax receipt reports. And the other item that we can talk about, 10:15 is when you need to jump off. Is that correct, Troy?
Yes.
Okay. So real quick, 2 minutes. Lines of credit and budgeting. I will circle back and explain this to the board. But I
Yeah.
had further conversations with Dalton, the legal representation, about what that looks like in terms of remaining within the statute and this idea that the DDA is supposed to operate off of debt according to a strict interpretation of the statute versus just spending money as they get it. But Troy, one last question for you. Ayers has in here property acquisition and policies around that. Is that something
Yeah.
we look at as part of your financial investment policy?
Absolutely. That is a form of investment. It's called an investment policy. And what you all are doing, whether it be programming, paying an ED, you are investing those dollars. And so, absolutely. I encourage my DDA clients to be thoughtful and creative. And sometimes owning a property while you take it off the tax rolls for a little bit, ultimately you want to have a plan and a vision for a property acquisition, but it's absolutely something that I contemplate in my policy documents because it is a statutory power of a DDA. And to the extent that you have the financial resources and the vision to affect a project on a parcel or property, I would absolutely encourage you to consider acquiring it when that day comes.
Great. Any last questions for Troy before he jumps off? Okay. We'll keep working through the document then. And Troy, I will circle back with you later this week.
Yes. Great stuff, guys. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we can keep working through this document and come back to this, or if you guys want to further discuss using Troy to do those financial policies, we can talk about that now, whatever makes sense.
I mean, I think it's super important. He says that they're flexible. He mentioned that they're, easy
I
to
feel like the
change.
air stuff worked out so well, right? Let's just double down.
Yeah, and I've talked to at least a couple other DDAs that work with him. Eagle is one of them, and then Inglewood, which is also relatively new, but has a good amount of money. They seem to have either lucked out or been strategic in achieving some new larger developments kind of around a hospital that's there. So they're playing with a good amount of money. But the director of the Inglewood DDA just sings Troy's praises in terms of working with him and what he brings to the table with their DDA. So I definitely don't think he's a bad choice to develop.
What was his price?
And it's not a question of Ayers versus Troy, because they play their separate roles, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, Troy's the policy guy,
But like
help us with our policy.
the package price of like those documents and stuff.
He
Just curious.
charges an hourly rate.
Yeah, but like,
I'd have to look at it. In my head, I have $250 an hour.
Yeah.
That's why I asked, because it's $500 an hour. I mean, for me to create.
but it
this,
costs
would take me
500
like
to
6
get those
days.
policy
Yeah.
documents if we're
10
tracking them
grand.
per hour and emails them. That's why I'm just like,
Yeah.
Oh,
what the
100%.
tangibles are with the hourly rate,
Oh, yeah.
Well, we absolutely need help with those policies.
Yeah.
Professional.
Because then they
Way
plan
beyond my
to-
pay.
Someone.
Well, I think also like that seed money, like that's what it's for, right?
Yeah.
And just going as fast as possible with the
Yeah.
stuff that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's better people. to do
And
it.
when he was saying acquisition, I don't know where my brain went, but he was talking about property acquisition.
That's down the road.
Down the road.
If something comes
okay.
available, it's not right away.
Yeah, and that's what Ayers kept telling me too. They're really pushing on the.
But Troy was saying that would be included in the document, your policy around property acquisition, or could
Oh,
include
awesome.
a policy around that.
So that would be an option for us in the future.
Okay,
for
so
the-
there'd be
For this
several
board.
policy documents, not just the developer. Okay.
I think it would be a larger investment document, and I have the one he created for Eagle, so I can share that with the group too.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was nice to ask for.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. These are public documents. I know when it was given to me by Bill Schrum for DCI, he's like, these are public documents, but be considerate about just
Right.
adopting in whole somebody's work that another community's paid him for.
Yeah.
But I would expect that you would see a lot of similarities. And I think because he has created those and you're paying by the hour, like he's already done a lot of that work. So
Right.
And then
Yeah.
thinking about this where, you brought up the planning commission and stuff, is there, what percentage or what different ways specifically for new development versus maybe redevelopment, how is that coming in? Like, is there one point of contact? Does it come in different ways? I'm just trying to think about how it's working currently versus where we need to be to let them know about the DDA.
in terms of the planning commission process,
Yeah.
I think it would make sense to have Garrett, our town planner, come to a DDA meeting and just kind of talk through that process in terms of what a developer submits at the various points and who provides revisions and comments and kind of just land use code and all of that fun planning world stuff.
Yeah.
Again, when we were talking with the planning commission, one suggestion was that if a sketch plan is submitted, which is not required at all,
It's
correct?
not required at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a point for the DDA to have those conversations or to be brought in and provide feedback. Again, I think the developers feel like once they've done a sketch plan, they're not looking to revise it a ton based on feedback unless they have to, and they don't have to based on anything the DDA says. With the caveat that there is that carrot of if they want money that the DDA has access to, then, there's more of an incentive to collaborate on those things. So having those conversations early on, if somebody comes to the town and says they're interested in doing a project, Because there usually is like a pre-application type meeting and, a developer like Greg that's in the community, like he's talking with the town all the time. But if we get a call, like there's a couple hotels that are potentially on the horizon and they're outside of the DDA boundary. One is next to the rec center as part of the Grand Park development, and the other one is part of Rendezvous across on the other side of Highway 40, just kind of south of there's the fire station and the bank there. Right on Rendezvous Road, so the corner of Rendezvous Road and Highway 40. So those are the type of things that, when somebody approaches the town and says that they're interested in this sort of thing, and if it's a project particularly within the DDA boundary, that we could say it would be great for you to present your thoughts to the DDA and get their feedback and see how this aligns with the vision and that
But
sort
the
of thing.
rendezvous property is not in the DDA. is
It is not, and I
It's
still,
right on that edge, right on the other side of the property.
it's a bit further outside of the boundary.
Can
I think it
expand
still makes sense for the
the
DDA to
boundaries.
be
Yeah,
updated on things like that, because obviously that affects economic development as a
Sure.
whole, for sure.
Do we have a policy on expanding boundaries?
Yeah, but
We don't currently.
But
We
it has to
could.
be
There's
contiguous.
not a policy, it's
And the-
it's just the way that you have to do it, you have to have petition, basically.
Right.
And
okay.
everybody that's within that DDA boundary to say yes.
Mhm.
For the, it's from how I understood it when I read it.
And the property owner
Okay.
wants to be part of it.
So
Yeah,
Get to the
so I mean,
promo.
I want to be ahead of that.
This will be good for you.
Yeah.
Being there.
If you were to annex something, property that a hotel was gonna be developed on, that would obviously bring in a huge amount of property tax. Because these ones are not immediately adjacent, you'd have to include all of the properties up to those
And that would have to be
hotels.
with approval of Clark's.
On the Grand Park side, yes.
Grand Park's not gonna be that part.
Yeah. there's-
Yeah, on the
Hard to get.
Rendezvous side, it would be, you have like the liquor store and the fly shop. There is another private property to the other side of those that I understand to be for sale generally. And then it would be Rendezvous has a development.
I'm
So
very
That's
intrigued by the
16
liquor store
16
concept
family
that,
development, that's
I don't know if you want to
Forever.
talk to them about that.
Grand County is for sale.
And those ones I think would be obvious. And again, I think it was a little bit of oversight isn't quite the right word, timing. Originally the open space was not going to be included in the DDA plan of development. And at the board meeting, when that final kind of determination was being made, the Board of Trustees wanted to include it because we are looking to activate that space with recreational amenities and eventually be able to hold things like picnic in the park and other events. And so it made sense that the DDA be able to spend money there. So that boundary was expanded during that meeting, and then staff looked at it afterwards and were like, well, now it cuts off right at like the liquor store and the fly shop, which are kind of the only really other commercial properties right there other than Clark's, which were specifically asked to be kept out.
But then they're developing just right after the liquor store, right? And then there's the option of using that whole like parking slab for different, like you said, recreation.
We've talked about, yeah, like, I mean, especially if you were to develop the recreational amenities in that open space, and there's already kind of just de facto is not the right word, but people pay to have their food trucks up there, and the
Mhm.
idea of like a food truck court or something is
Yeah.
right on Highway 40, but it would be visible,
But
and
the
right next to the future bike park and
DDA
other
could
stuff.
put up maybe some trees and like.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
that could be
know.
a conversation we could have in terms of talking with those property owners.
If it's-
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it would be highly beneficial to start the process of expanding DDA boundaries.
Cause I mean, I know the bike park's right there, the liquor store's already there.
Considering,
Usually.
Right off the board.
hotels are looking into moving into our town, and there's quite a few other things that are looking to move here from my understanding.
Yeah, and like
But
all
It's
the,
a real
space.
process, that the voting process and making that all happen is a serious process.
Yeah, well,
But you
we
can still
better
work-
get
head
started.
towards it.
Yeah.
But in terms
Well,
of
that's 4 years
annexation,
here, huh?
if the property owner is if
4
the
years.
property is adjacent to the DDA and the property owner can petition the board, and it's up to the board to make that determination. So it doesn't have to go back to the voters.
Nice.
Oh.
I would say we do want to have a certain level of sensitivity to other taxing entities that, I mean, one of the the reservations about the DDA was, I mean, we are taking money from the fire district, the rec district,
Oh.
all these other entities that would otherwise get that tax revenue.
I see.
And the fear, particularly from the fire district, was that it would just continue to expand and expand and expand. And then, I mean, like Winter Park is starting a URA, and it's pretty much all of Winter Park and the resort. And the URAs work a little differently in that they have to negotiate those sharing agreements with those different taxing entities. So I'm not saying we shouldn't expand or shouldn't talk to,
Right.
like, I think the liquor store and the fly shop, if they wanted, flooring store, if they wanted to come in, would be great to include, but as you expand, that tax money is coming to the DDA versus to other taxing entities.
And I do feel like that's like a teaser location too, cause like there could be, you know, Ayers kept saying that women's retail is one of the only like good, I mean, although I just got out of it, I can't vouch for that, but like it is like one of the only like best commercial opportunities, cause those are the people that spend money. Other than alcohol, but like there could be some teaser properties right there that then encourage people to continue to travel into Fraser.
Mm.
Where if there was like, you know, really small retail fronts that, I don't know what the property is before the liquor store, but that's just what I'm imagining.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't
Yeah.
know that there's any specific plans for that property or.
Right.
But like
There was
the,
that
so like the property, the ranch, the 500 acres for sale on the east side of 40, just past County Road 8. Like that valuation's assuming a super, super dense, you know, metropolis going in there. Same
Mhm.
with the one on the west side behind the pole yard. To get anywhere near the numbers they want, those are gonna be dense developments with tons of commercial, tons of height, tons of density. Like, I feel like we would want that in the DDA.
That's
But
the
both of
problem.
those properties currently sit outside of the town. So
Right.
how could a landowner be a part of the Fraser DDA but not annexed into the town?
That is a good question. There is talk of annexation of those, and I guess in my head, they would be annexed and then petitioned to join the DDA. I have not thought of the possibility of them joining the DDA without the annexation piece. I think they have to be within the town limits, but I'll double check that. Cause I hadn't really thought about that possibility.
Because I think expanding would be great, because like a major hotel is gonna be a huge cash driver for our funding and allow us to do like cool,
Yeah.
you know, big projects. There's not really land within the DDA to do something like that right now. Like the biggest we're contemplating on Clayton Court's on an acre site. There's only so much you can do.
Uh-huh.
And then like the communications to the fire department or like the, there would be probably a step-by-step process for that, right? How do you like say, hey, what, I mean, I guess they wouldn't be excited about it, but
I don't think they would be excited about it.
If you're gonna go to something like a
you can
multi-story
help 'em
building
back.
with visitors in it, the fire department would probably have a lot of angst about that.
Yeah,
Because they
because
have to increase their capacity far beyond the things we discussed.
right.
Yeah, but they already,
Well, it's
yeah, they
also-
already need to do that.
That's,
Well,
yes.
Yeah, they
Well, it's
already
within
need to
our
expand.
powers too, I think, like, you know, if we're gonna annex or bring in, say, for instance, the 120 acres over here, and there's gonna be 1,000 residential units. Like, we're also able to say, hey, we're gonna get all this TIF, like, we can allocate some to the, like,
That's what I was
no
wondering.
one's gonna want, like, you know,
Well,
Yeah.
that was my
like
question.
some sort of overburden on the fire department.
We can
Like,
have share back agreements.
Yeah.
We can
Can
do that
we?
within the current DDA.
Yeah.
boundaries.
So we could say to the fire department, you let us do this and you get on our side about this, we can help you with
Yeah.
a certain amount of increment a year as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for better or for worse, as I understand the statute, we're being recorded here. Like, we don't need the fire district's permission,
Right.
but if we want to play nice, you know,
Yeah.
and be a good, again, fiduciary of tax dollars and community partner, those are the conversations that we would have.
Well, same thing, like, yeah, you know, yeah, next to the fly shop, right? There was some plan to do something, say, hey, we want you to be part of the DDA so we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's a much different conversation than like, hey, just Yeah, we
Right.
want you to join.
Yeah.
You know,
Let's go ahead and keep moving. So I do want to try to get through this whole document in the next half hour and before people's brains totally fizzle out.
the authority.
a lot.
But I added a note. I don't know that annexation, I don't think it is the right word, but, oh, I thought I added it. Where did it go? There it is. But we can add that as an item to our work plan. All right. So jumping up, are you guys okay with me then giving Troy the go ahead to start working on a financial policy?
Yes.
Just for the record, would someone like to make a
I'll make a
motion?
motion to vote on Troy
For what?
So, yeah, for Troy to.
to take on this work plan.
To create a finance and investment policy for the DDA.
Make a motion to have Troy create our policy for the DDA.
Finance and investment policy.
Financial investment policy.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Super.
opposed?
Great.
All right, thank you.
All right, we'll keep this as priority one. I did want to add language into here about the DDA's involvement in land use code updates and downtown development standards. And then just something around, I don't know that policy is the right word, but guidelines around when the DDA is introduced to developers and projects. So, to keep it moving along, I can add that. I was thinking we would work through this and then we can kind of present it at our next meeting for formal adoption, if that works. Once we add in any edits. All right,
And then if you send out Eagles, if we looked at that and this together,
if I send out what?
the Eagle,
Yes, so the Eagles, they probably have a work plan as well, but it was their investment policy
Okay.
document.
all right.
Yep.
Is there an example of a work plan that you have or something that he could share too?
Sometimes there's something within DDA plans and I may have I think I do have Eagles as well. So yeah, I'll see what I have.
Cool.
Yeah. And I can do that. And again, even if we adopt this, I don't know that we're required to formally adopt this, but I don't think it hurts to adopt it. I still see it as a working document that we will keep coming back to and revising as makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, so next up, finance and investment policy. And again, establishing a schedule for reviewing the policies, I think makes sense. It sounds like Troy recommends doing it annually, which makes sense to me. But we can talk about that process for making revisions and establishing approval process. Event support coordination policy. I told Mike I was kind of surprised he put this in here because he's very guarded about
Exactly.
having DDAs become event planners. And when I talked to him about it, he's like, well, I put that in there because I didn't want them, like, he doesn't think DDAs should be trying to host 10 new events kind of thing. So this idea of an annual or biannual event was kind of the guardrails for that, I guess. But so work with business and property owners on existing and future local events. Consider starting an annual or biannual event that becomes a tradition and draws residents and visitors. Does that sound like something this DDA wants to do or I mean, the word is consider.
Sponsor
I think we
events.
should.
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that highlighted part more than anything else.
I mean,
Yeah. Tagging on to someone else's.
I mean, I think like the film festival and the mural festival and stuff, like we can get our word out about what we do there, but I don't want to start a new
I don't
event.
think
Yeah.
we should be like spearheading.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
to be honest,
Existing and
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
existing.
future ideas.
yeah.
and the film festival's gonna be expanding anyway, so there's all types of stuff that you can add into that.
Mhm.
And
You
I'm
really want to
interested.
add some
I'm
sort
starting one too. Not a film festival.
of right. No, I know it's good. That'll help.
Yeah.
So he had identified potential sponsors, but then he's also talking about us, the DDA sponsoring events. So I've just added define the DDA's sponsorship criteria and budget. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Is that how
That
much
would-
money you're allocating towards events? event
how much
sponsorship
money and what,
and donation.
what events we would sponsor.
Yeah, I feel like.
So if
that
it's
would be
65,000, you should have like maybe 10% of that if that, like 6 grand or less.
Yeah.
Probably less for now.
And none of these decisions we're looking to make right now. We're just making determinations about what goes in the work plan.
Yeah, because like if we were activating an area and like the DDA wanted to support that activation and make it, you know, pop, I guess, or, you know, I don't know.
I think it's something that we should seriously consider because events do promote people to come to the town.
Mhm.
And I think that's good for developers who are trying to sell retail space.
Right.
So I think it's something we should give a lot of thought to.
Mhm. I think the spearheading, I'm already going back on it because if like, say the bike park, say we want the fly fishing shop to promote like a fishing campaign for like kids or something,
Okay.
and it would bring a truck concept to that area, we would sort of be spearheading that in a sense.
Yeah, I think
but-
that's a really good point. I think as we get deeper into this, if we get more engagement by businesses, and some of them
Don't have time
we
for
don't
that.
even talk to yet,
Yeah.
I think we might get a lot of good participation and support.
So what if we change this to consider starting or encouraging, kind of supporting an annual or biannual event? And so that could be the DDA taking something on or just encouraging others like the fly fishing shop to do so. We can leave it as a priority 3. So that means it won't be front and center of what we're looking to do, but can revisit it at some point during the year.
And anybody can calm me down because I am an event planner, so I like get excited because it's something I constantly do, but it is dangerous.
Yeah, it's all
No,
case by
that's
case
what I do too.
basis.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I mean, again, I'm
It's a
sure
lot
you
of
guys
work.
get the same thing. It's hard. You could
Oh,
sponsor.
you know, in the
something
town of Fraser
every
has,
single
we
week.
hired a gal to do our
It's-
events for us.
It's
yeah.
really
Yeah.
open-ended
Yeah.
as is though,
Yeah.
so that's like
So
not
supporting
any
the
type
town.
of event in particular there. And so, I mean,
Keeps it open.
Yeah.
that's a good thing and a bad thing, because then say that you have 100 events here in the next, decade being planned, then you're gonna get flooded, because as you know, anywhere where an event planner can find money, they're gonna go. Especially when you get tapped out of your local business sponsorships, that happens really fast.
Yeah. And I can add, I mean, the town has considered adding, or there's been talk of potentially adding like one more event. The big ones that we do are the Mural Festival and Fire and Ice. But it is a huge chunk of Sarah Wick's time, and she is largely supported by PAC. And Steve, unfortunately, is no longer here, but as I understand it, that's a huge chunk of what PAC does is put on those events. So I think they can be great and bring attention and people to Fraser, but just need to be cognizant of time. All right, so we'll keep moving then. Complete a preliminary inventory of needs, including easements to extend infrastructure. Develop an inventory of potential properties that may be of interest to the DDA or private investors. Consider budget requirements and ability to fund. So again, I think Troy, as part of the investment policy, can touch on some of this. I don't know that I don't believe his document would include this actual like preliminary inventory. But if that's something that the board wants to keep in here, that's something we could look at some point, and probably working with the town to kind of do. His document might include some of this ranking criteria. Any thoughts? Good?
And so in priority 3, and that would be later, later in 2025.
Yeah, and he
Six.
actually does
Yeah.
have a time frame here, and so that's
Yeah.
something we can look at as well in terms of later in 2025, and some things can be 2026 or 2027.
Once the town's finished its work on that plan.
Right, the comp plan might make sense.
Yeah.
And again, he's got the event stuff kind of for the second half of 2025.
I'm just gonna speak randomly. Ayers had mentioned something about the policy with developers, or like you could put it into your agreement with them that then they can help you acquire pieces of the water, the filtration stuff that Tiffany was talking about.
The stormwater drainage.
Thank you. So like when you're talking to a developer, that would be like a priority item with them to say, can you help us acquire this water, this section? Okay. Does that make
So
sense?
there's, yeah, so what he might have been talking about would be easements. I know Paul Johnson, our public works director, has identified a particular strip of property that I can pull up on a map and talk about later. That he said if the DDA, if he had his wish list for the DDA, that would be what would help him out the most. And it would, the idea would be that they could build drainage through there, and it would help with some of the flooding and stuff that there's been issues with behind the Xerox building in terms of some of the water that has been of issue to those properties back there. So this is actually kind of up by your barrel house there, Barry, and the old Finnegan's restaurant properties, I understand.
I have thoughts about the sewer project, because they diverted water, and when you put in the sewers, you put all this gravel in there, so it just pulled it all over to there.
Yeah. So again, we can revisit all this stuff individually as we keep moving, but the idea would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
acquiring kind of those easements to help with that. A new development will be required to have appropriate drainage. But again, if we wanted pretty rock gardens and public spaces as part of that drainage, then that's where we could try to incentivize something like that. But the developer wouldn't necessarily be required to do it that way.
But that could be in our work plan matrix as a priority, like those environmental items would be something on the top of the list. To make
Yes.
sure we, okay.
Yeah.
That's where I was going with it.
Gotcha.
It's like
Right, so as we have like an
Environmental
investment
sustainability.
document, a priority of kind of environmental standards and,
Not the pretty stuff, but it's the important stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the downtown Riverwalk vision, this is what we were talking about a little earlier. That Ayers put it in here as creating a scope of work and budget to develop a preliminary concept plan for the proposed Riverwalk district. Rough locations of public areas and other local amenities, again, as part of the scope for the town comprehensive plan. Cushing Terrell, who's overseeing that, has been charged with that, and the town is already paying for that. So my suggestion would be that can rework the wording here to just have the DDA involved in that process and providing input in that process. And then if it is determined once we have that comp plan that it is not the level that the DDA wants, we can revisit that and doing something more kind of granular or more extensive kind of placemaking within that larger plan and vision, if that makes sense.
Yeah. makes sense, Jess.
Okay. And I think what also will be helpful is, you know, on the 22nd, if we do have Greg present his sketch plan for the property that is kind of in the pipeline on Clayton Court, and any other potential plans that might be at a more preliminary stage, that'll help kind of just inform things that are already kind of in the works and set to happen as part of that. All right. So I will rework that section just to reflect that. But in addition to that, clear vision and guidelines that private developers can build to and the DDA can fund. Recognize this as the first attempt to establish a vision. Conditions will change and opportunities will arise. So it talks about design guidelines. I will try to work to figure out in what level of detail the comp plan is supposed to include this. But some of this, I think, would speak to kind of those joint meetings with the planning commission, in terms of talking about what's already in our code and what changes might potentially be proposed to kind of allow for more of that kind of creative development. In my head, there's kind of two separate processes here. One is what the code requires and ultimately rests with the planning commission and the board of trustees, but the DDA can advocate for things. And then what the DDA outlines as their priorities for what they will help incentivize with TIF. So things that maybe aren't officially required by code, but that the DDA can encourage. And those could be design guidelines or, you know, things like the easements for drainage or pretty rock gardens versus, you know, more traditional kind of drainage methods. Does that make sense? Okay. And so this is listed as a top priority to kind of happen in the first part of 2025. And as I understand it, that should align with our comp plan, but I'll work on just firming that up. Assessing downtown infrastructure needs. And so this in part, I think, is in line, Abby, with that kind of discussion around easements and things like that and drainage. So working with the town to identify what those needs are and developing a high level scope and budget, determining what is already planned and budgeted by the town. And really anything that we were doing as part of 2025 would need to be happening now, since we need to create and present a budget to go with as part of the town's budget here in the next few weeks. So we could kind of do it very preliminarily, but then otherwise, as part of what we do next year, that could be looking at 2026's budget. Any thoughts, questions, comments? So facade improvements, understanding the scope of the town's program to determine how the DDA can partner in this, or if there are gaps that the DDA can supplement. I think largely it makes sense right now. One of the items that was not in here, it is the town's program, but if you guys are providing recommendations, just kind of developing your own matrix for approvals, which ideally, I mean, should line up with the town's plan. But I think that's something we could add in here, either here as part of facade programs or further down as part of programs. Just developing the town, the DDA's criteria in line with the town's criteria for that program until the DDA has their own programs potentially down the road. That makes sense? Okay. Drainage and sidewalk improvements, which I think I've become more pessimistic about as we've had more conversations just with the realities of Fraser's climate and how much can be done. Other than installing geothermal throughout the town and having heated sidewalks everywhere, but that's probably outside of the DDA's budget anytime in the near future. Lastly, assessing ways to improve areas for pedestrian bikes and other forms of non-car travel. Consider branded bike racks and branded bike lanes. That's off. Creative public spaces, grid and access improvements. Again, a lot of this I think is going to be in line with that work with the comp plan for kind of that visioning, and then getting more granular as it makes sense, or just engaging in placemaking for kind of specific corners or aspects. And there are some good grant potential money out there for stuff like that. Using the brand to develop a set of signs for wayfinding to help people navigate the downtown area. Consider using the signs to develop signage for businesses. Not exactly sure what he means there. One of the things the town, I don't know if you've noticed, that we recently replaced some of the older signs, and just as of, I don't know if it was the end of last week or over the weekend, they put up the ones around Old Town that are directing you to like Town Hall and the elementary school. So I imagine a lot of it would be just kind of piggybacking off of.
Yeah, those new wayfinding signs are awesome. And there's plenty of room on them, and they're nice and legible.
Yeah, good. You think the print's big enough?
What's that?
I worry that the print on those is never big enough for someone driving in a vehicle.
Yeah, Highway 40 is pretty good. If you're in town, you're slowing down before you make the turns.
Yeah.
But they're up for now, so.
One of the priorities that's come up, I believe, in conversations with this group as well as at the town level, is if we do want to look into some sort of like over the highway type signage or kind of grand marquee. I don't know if that's something that we would want to look at.
I want that.
I do.
Okay.
Did you
I think that would really.
Fraser.
I think
Yeah,
for
100%.
retail on Clayton Court, having something's gonna be necessary,
Yeah.
just to
Like-
like let people know. it's
What Arrow
happening.
did, that
Yeah.
random stage, like that.
No.
I'm just teasing.
No.
Sorry, that was on record.
Right, gotta.
It's okay.
I'm still trying to figure out what that is.
Uh-huh.
But did you see the Grand Lake one? Because our architect is they designed that out of the old cables, ski cables.
Oh, cool.
And it's really cool. I saw the mini version of it
Uh-huh.
and it was like, I was just like so excited for Grand Lake because it's very
So
Grand
that'll
Lake.
go right when you turn off of, right when you turn like towards Main Street off of the highway instead
I-
into the park.
I don't even know actually. It was like they have someone welding it and it's, you know, they need an engineer and all this stuff, but it's with these metal cable wires from the ski lifts. And so it has that connectivity, but it's pretty grand.
Yeah.
There's like moose and
That's
Oh,
sweet.
cool.
Oh, what
all
for
sorts
Winter
of stuff
Park? Is that for Grand Park?
for Grand Lake.
Grand Lake. Ooh.
And I mean, I was gonna say you did a good job with amping up the snowcat at
Oh, yeah.
with the sign of the sticker. Good job.
That was not my doing,
I-
but I
I
will
think-
pass that on.
It's pretty soon after I had mentioned something about it being a photo op. and
Yeah.
not-
Yeah. Okay. So this he has for later 2025, 2026. And in terms of like signage for Main Street, that's going to come later. But if we're interested in some sort of marquee sign, maybe moving that up to a P1 and looking at that for the budget, I can try to figure out what Grand Lake paid for theirs just as a baseline figure for budgeting. What else did we have in here? Projects for alternative forms of transportation might be a little further down the line, but I think is great to have in there. Community branding and marketing, building out social media strategy, accounts, and basic policy. We've talked about that, and that's on the radar. Some of the marketing strategy, and this, I don't remember if it was here or within events, talks about creating a DDA webpage and events. The Explore Fraser website, businesses can upload their own events to it, and that's kind of our one-stop shop for events. So I would say we take a look at that and see where it might be back and maybe just link that. And if it is seen as insufficient, we can talk about how that could be beefed up. Either through that Explore Fraser website or if the GDA wants to do something independently. But I would think it would make sense to kind of collaborate and integrate between the two. Create clear communication processes and expectations between the town and the DDA. Consider a schedule that defines the frequency of communications. So we have the IGA. The IGA will need to be revisited at the beginning of January, which I'm kind of regretting having done because that feels right around the corner. I know at least one Board of Trustees members has asked for more frequent formal updates than once a year. So it's been suggested maybe quarterly if that feels reasonable.
Reasonable, I think.
Katie should just give the update every board meeting.
I mean, she definitely does.
Take better notes.
Yeah, kind of informal updates, but if we wanted a formal kind of report to be presented to the board and whether, I mean, Katie could do it, you know, Lori could attend, we can talk about what that looks like,
Yeah.
but
So it'd be 2 meetings.
just kind of establishing that. Okay.
Maybe have a
Every 2
quarterly
months, every month.
meeting.
Okay,
the
okay.
other times we have taking a board time,
Here's what I can.
expanded to
Okay.
1 hour.
Yeah, a lot of workshops.
Oh.
Business support and resources, ensuring access to resources and guidance for small business attraction, retention, and growth. I know there's somewhere else here about working with partners, but I think this would fall under that area as well in terms of working closely with like the chamber and Grand County Economic Development on what they're doing and what our role in that might be. Sorry, I'm going to try to just go quickly because I feel like, well, we don't have much time and we're losing people. So this is what we talked about in terms of developing a DDA website and newsletter. Seeing where there's overlap with the town and what makes sense. There's the partnership piece. Developing an annual budget process, staff expectations. I think some of this is just kind of generally tracking staff needs and time, and looking at that as there's more money to potentially hire actual full-time or part-time staff members. And then within this, develop an accounting system. I can add this tracking of the tax receipts. And then also, I will circle back versus trying to get into it now, but just talking about what the statute requires in terms of how the DDA spends money and what that looks like in terms of that. And then we can add in language about developing a grant strategy. We can talk about an annexation policy and strategy. Anything that you feel is missing? I know, I see like glazed over eyes.
Right.
I can, yeah, I want to see, I'll have to print it out. Let's see
Yeah.
those things.
Okay. I'll try to clean up a couple things based on things that we've talked about and can send out the revision. If anybody does have anything, and then we can maybe look to, again, I think it continues to be a working document. So I don't know what that looks like. I'll figure out if we should have a motion to adopt this or
I mean,
just kind of keep moving forward with it.
Yeah.
All right. We just have updates
Just
left.
updates or other business.
So the
Um,
16th is the town board meeting, if we can attend that,
Yes.
and then we're here on the 22nd.
Yes.
Okay.
And then starting in November, I really would like to try to stick with that second Tuesday of the month so people can have that time blocked out. I know, luckily, a lot of people seem to have some flexibility, but for others, it's more difficult to make meetings if they're not set far out in advance. And then that fourth Tuesday as needed if we need a second meeting in the month.
Oh,
and
you signed up
then
for that one. I
I
almost-
will eventually get to a social media blueprint plan.
Perfect. That's
Yeah.
in the work plan.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll get that.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Addie.
The last
Um,
thing I want to mention as an update, and we can circle back to this on the 22nd, Downtown Colorado Inc. does have a challenge program. I have struggled to fully understand the program, even though I've seen parts of it. But basically, there's a series of webinars. They ask the DDA to identify a property that they would like to see developed or redeveloped within the DDA boundary. I've asked if it could be all of Clayton Court, and they're pretty flexible, like it's meant to serve our purposes. But it would not be the whole DDA necessarily, but it would be, you know, at least a couple of you, if we wanted to do this, participating in this program. And I see it largely as an educational opportunity, professional development for the DDA. It's kind of geared towards, I think, the idea of how do you work, like how do you identify a property that you want to have redeveloped, and then how do you potentially attract investment and work with a potential developer to kind of get what you want out of this property or parcel. I think it could be valuable, but I think it is a fair amount of time. It is free for us to participate as we have a VIP membership with DCI, but it would be a series. I want to say it's like every other Wednesday. They kind of do a soft launch later in October and then really ramp up, I believe, in like January. And then it kind of culminates in DCI's annual conference that's happening in Greeley next year. So it's something to consider. I'll try to send out more information and you can look at DCI's webpage so we can talk about if that's something we would want to do or not. We definitely don't have to do it. They'll do it again, so we could do it at a future date. Again, I think there could be value in it, but it is a fairly decent time commitment. And I think their stance on it is it's you get out of it what you put into it. So it's not like we're in trouble if we don't attend every webinar, but if we don't have that ability to make that time commitment, then it's probably not worth the effort that you would have put in kind of thing. So I want to throw that out there.
I'm not committing to that right now. You're looking at me.
No, I'm not looking for the information. We can revisit it. I just wanted to
Yeah.
throw it on the radar. We would need a couple eager volunteers that were willing to individually commit to the time. So
No one looks
Yeah.
to either.
I
And
feel
we
like
pretty
I'm
much
not signing up
identified
much for
where we're
October.
focusing on,
Yeah.
it's pretty clear.
yeah, I mean, it really, I
All
would
the
be
first
thinking
February.
more about the time commitment that you would have next January, February, March,
Oh,
April. But I can try to find the schedule and send it out.
yeah, send it out. I'll look at it.
Okay.
But like, yeah, Now that I'm
$2 to give me credits for that.
Is it like-
kind
is
of
it
fun
like-
in the oven.
Is it like an hour a week or is it
Yes.
like
I usually like that stuff. though.
5 hours?
I know, yeah, I thought of you as, yeah.
I like it. If I can,
Oh.
if I'll look at my workload for January, December, January.
Final lottery ticket might be.
and then, cause it's mostly listening, right?
It's mostly
I think it's
listening. They have you fill out a survey. They have you, some communities have told me it was more work than they were expecting.
Okay,
So,
I'll look at it.
I'll try to pull the information together. Like I said, I feel like they have a very kind of vague, ambiguous description of it. When I talk to communities that have done it,
Yeah.
some of them are like, well, it was useful, but they're still not exactly sure of what like the deliverable was they got out of it.
It's like, if it's oversaturation, like I usually like that stuff, like a lot of information, if it's just listening.
And it's a series of webinars that we could participate in now. So like I think they have one Wednesday morning on like small redevelopment that was in that newsletter that I sent out yesterday. So if anybody wanted to, you could jump on that webinar just to kind of get a feel for it.
Yeah, I mean, y'all, I'm usually just in my studio sewing lace, so it is stuff where I can just like listen to it, other than true crime. So, like, it's not a bad thing. As long as my face does, as long as I don't have to have like high interaction.
Yeah. So I'm not looking for a commitment. It was something that I wanted people to be able to kind of chew on before we had a formal discussion about whether or not we wanted to do
It
it.
is a wealth of knowledge that they have to offer.
Yes.
I mean, I got so much from that stuff.
Yeah.
Just the Colfax walkthrough. And
Yeah,
it's
no, I think
useful
DTI is a
stuff.
great resource,
Yeah.
but I really recognize people have lives and other businesses and only so much bandwidth. So,
But yeah, send that over. I'll look at it for sure.
okay.
Yay.
Anything else?
All right, I don't think anything else.
That's good.
Okay. You want to move to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All right,
Sorry.
all in favor?
Hi.
Thank you all.
Lunch.
Can I ask
You.
Yeah, that works out.